Hi everyone, my name is Chloe Vance. I'm 31 years old, and as I sit here recording this, I never thought I'd be posting something like this online. I've always been a private person. I've always been the one who kept my head down, who absorbed the blows, who swallowed the unfairness just to keep the peace. But there comes a breaking point. There comes a moment when the people who share your blood push you so far into a corner that the only thing left to do is bite back. If you had told me 8 years ago that my own brother and sister would show up on my driveway with an enormous 26-foot commercial moving truck exactly 18 hours after our father's heart took its final beat, I probably would have laughed at you. I would have told you that nobody is that deeply, irredeemably cruel. I would have told you that even in the most broken, dysfunctional families, there is a boundary of basic human decency that people simply do not cross out of sheer shame. But I was wrong. I was incredibly, dangerously naive. And over the last decade, I've learned a very painful lesson. When a narcissistic family realizes the source of their unearned privilege is drying up, their capacity for absolute malice is completely limitless. Before I tell you about the trucks, the legal documents, the screaming matches, and the exact moment the sheriff's deputies stood in my foyer while my sister completely lost her mind, I need you to understand how we got here. Because this isn't just a story about a house, or a disputed inheritance, or money. This is about what happens when one child is designated as the family shock absorber, the one who is expected to bleed so that everyone else can live comfortably. I'm posting this here because I'm emotionally exhausted. I haven't slept a full night in nearly a decade, and honestly, if you've ever dealt with family members who treat your kindness as a weakness, you already know the heavy, suffocating feeling I'm talking about. Please, as you listen to this, tell me in the comments if you would have handled this differently, because for a long time, I genuinely felt like I was losing my grip on reality. To really grasp the magnitude of the betrayal, we have to go back to the beginning. Growing up, our family structure was incredibly rigid, designed to uphold an illusion of perfection. My older brother Julian was the golden child. He was 4 years older than me, built like an athlete, aggressively competitive, and possessed that specific type of arrogant charisma that makes manipulative people incredibly successful in high-stakes corporate environments. My older sister Beatrice was 2 years older than me. She was the princess, the delicate flower who could do no wrong. If Julian got a brand new luxury car for graduating high school, Beatrice got a 6-week European vacation for simply maintaining a C average. And then there was me. I was the quiet one, the academic overachiever who never caused trouble, never asked for expensive clothes, and never threw tantrums. In the inverted, sick logic of a toxic household, my independence meant I didn't need investment. I was the scapegoat by default. I was the baseline against which their luxury was measured. My accomplishments were expected and ignored. Their basic participation in life was celebrated with massive family banquets. I remember my 16th birthday. I asked for a simple set of drawing pencils and a sketchbook. My parents forgot to buy it. They handed me a $20 bill at dinner and told me to pick it up myself. 2 months later, for Beatrice's 18th birthday, they rented out a local country club and hired a live band. That was the dynamic. That was the air I breathed. Our mother passed away when I was 19. It was a sudden, devastating aneurysm that shattered the foundation of our home overnight. My father, Arthur, was a proud, deeply disciplined man who had spent 40 years building a specialized custom millwork and architectural timber company. He wasn't a billionaire, let's get that clear right now, because I hate those fake internet stories where everyone inherits a private island and a fleet of sports cars. But he was very comfortable. He owned a beautiful, historic 4-acre property in upstate New York, a house built in the late 19th century with incredible hand-carved woodwork that he had personally restored over 30 years. That house was his life's work. It was his sanctuary. It was the physical manifestation of his sweat, his blood, and his legacy. When my mother died, the family completely fractured. Julian and Beatrice didn't rally around my father to help him through his grief. Instead, they immediately checked out, viewing our mother's death not as a tragedy, but as a financial unlocking event. Julian moved to Manhattan to pursue investment banking, demanding a massive portion of our mother's liquid life insurance estate as a launch pad that my grieving father willingly provided just to avoid conflict. Beatrice moved to Miami, marrying a wealthy, older real estate developer and adopting a lifestyle that consisted entirely of country club lunches, spa days, and carefully curated social media feeds. They rarely called, and when they did call, it was never to ask how Dad was doing. It was always because a credit card transaction had failed, or they needed my father to co-sign a commercial lease, or they needed an infusion of cash to maintain their image. I stayed local. I couldn't leave him. I saw the absolute devastation in his eyes. I went to a local state university, commuted from home, and spent my evenings helping my father with the administrative books for his business. I watched him age 10 years in the span of 24 months. The grief dug deep into his bones, hollowing out his cheeks and dulling the bright spark that used to be in his eyes. And then, by the time I turned 23, the physical tremors began. It started so subtly that we almost missed it. A slight drag in his right foot when he walked down the hallway. A momentary hesitation when he reached across the table for his coffee mug. His handwriting, which had always been the precise, beautiful script of a master draftsman, began to look cramped and shaky. We thought it was arthritis. We thought it was just the natural wear and tear of a man who had spent his entire adult life lifting heavy oak timbers and running industrial planers. But within a year, the symptoms accelerated violently. The diagnosis came down like an absolute sledgehammer. It wasn't just Parkinson's. It was a rare, incredibly aggressive form of atypical Parkinsonism combined with multi-infarct dementia. I will never forget the day we got the news. We were sitting in a sterile, white-walled neurologist's office in the city. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, making the room feel cold and clinical. Dr. Aris, a kind but brutally honest specialist, sat across from us, folding his hands on his desk, and laid out the blueprint of our future in cold, medical terms. "Arthur," Dr. Aris said gently, looking my father right in the eyes, "this condition is progressive, and it is unrelenting. Your motor functions will systematically collapse. You will experience sharp, unpredictable drops in your cognitive abilities. You will eventually lose the ability to walk, then the ability to swallow, then the ability to turn over in bed. You will require 24-hour, specialized intensive care. You need to start making arrangements right now." I remember sitting in that plastic chair, feeling the air completely leave my lungs. The room started spinning. I looked at my father, this big, strong man who used to carry me on his shoulders, staring blankly at the medical charts on the desk, his hands trembling violently in his lap. The moment we got back to the house, I immediately called an emergency family meeting. I created a group chat with Julian and Beatrice, sending them detailed summaries of the medical reports, the doctor's prognosis, and an urgent plea asking them to fly home for just one weekend so we could coordinate a long-term care plan. I thought, surely this is the moment. This is the moment they drop their selfish acts, realize our father is dying, and step up to be a family. Do you want to know what my sister texted back? I still have the screenshot saved. I look at it whenever I feel even a tiny shred of guilt for what happened later. She wrote, "Oh, honey, that's so sad. But honestly, my anxiety cannot handle medical stuff right now. It literally triggers my panic attacks to even think about hospitals. You're already living there, and let's be real, you don't really have a serious career path anyway, so it just makes perfect sense for you to handle the day-to-day. Let us know if it gets critical. Sending positive vibes." I stared at my phone for 10 minutes, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her response. Positive vibes. Our father's brain was dying, his body was shutting down, and she was sending positive vibes from a poolside cabana in Florida. Julian wasn't any better. He didn't even bother to text. He sent a brief, formal email from his corporate banking address, CCing his personal assistant. "Chloe, I am currently in the middle of a major Q3 acquisition. I cannot take time off to sit in doctor's offices and hold hands. Hire a private nursing agency immediately. Use Dad's operational business accounts to fund it. I will review the financial outlays at the end of the fiscal year to ensure the estate assets aren't being mismanaged or drained by overpriced caregivers. Keep me updated on his vital metrics." That was it. That was the absolute entirety of their contribution to the greatest crisis our family had ever faced. They didn't offer a single dollar of their own money. They didn't offer to take a single weekend shift so I could sleep. And worse, they immediately, seamlessly framed my existence as an unpaid, highly convenient asset whose time had zero value because I wasn't working in a glass high-rise or attending charity galas. I tried doing what Julian said. I tried hiring private help. For the first 6 months, we used a highly rated home care agency, paying exorbitant fees out of my father's dwindling business reserves. But if you've ever dealt with long-term elder care in America, you already know the brutal, exhausting reality. The turnover rate is astronomical. The workers are underpaid, overworked, and frequently fail to show up for the night shifts without any warning. I would wake up at 3 a.m. to the sound of crashing furniture, only to find my father caught in a state of absolute night terror, wandering down the dark hallway, deeply confused, crying out and trying to find his long-dead wife. And the agency nurse? Asleep on the living room sofa, wearing headphones. After the third time I found him bruised and bleeding from a fall on the hardwood stairs while the professional caregiver was scrolling through TikTok in the kitchen, I snapped. I realized that a stranger was never going to protect him. A stranger was never going to love him enough to stay awake when it mattered. So I made the hardest, most devastating choice of my life. I dropped out of my master's program in architectural history. I quit my promising part-time job at a local firm. I packed up my small apartment, broke my lease, and moved my entire life back into my childhood bedroom. I became my father's full-time, primary, round-the-clock caretaker. I became the person who managed his complex medication schedule. 15 different pills a day, timed to the exact hour. I became the person who bathed him, who changed his adult diapers, who pureed his food into an unappetizing, thick paste so he wouldn't aspirate and choke to death on his own dinner. I became the person who held his hand in the dark during the terrifying midnight hallucinations, when his broken brain convinced him he was trapped in a burning building. I want to pause here for a second, because I need to talk to the caretakers out there. If you've ever had your entire life consumed by the slow, painful, humiliating decline of a parent, while your siblings lived their absolute best lives online, please let me know in the comments how you survived it. How did you keep your sanity? Because there were nights when I sat on the cold tile of the bathroom floor, listening to my father cry out in confusion from the bedroom, looking at Instagram photos of my sister drinking champagne on a yacht in Ibiza, where I genuinely felt like I was a ghost. I felt like I had already died, and I was just haunting my own life, watching the rest of the world spin on without me. The years began to blur into a relentless, grueling cycle of physical and emotional exhaustion. From 2018 to 2022, my entire existence was measured in milligrams of carbidopa-levodopa and the distinct, heavy, unavoidable smell of medical-grade disinfectant. My father's business, his life's pride, had to be liquidated to pay off outstanding commercial debts and fund his massive ongoing medical supply costs. Julian handled the liquidation from his office in New York. That meant he signed the corporate dissolution paperwork via DocuSign, but he never actually set foot on the property to help clear out the massive workshop. He hired a team of cheap, aggressive, industrial cleanout workers who showed up one Tuesday morning and began indiscriminately throwing 30 years of my father's custom hand tools, beautiful antique planers, and raw timber into the back of a scrap metal truck. I stood in the driveway in the freezing rain, weeping uncontrollably at the absolute destruction of my father's legacy. When I saw them grab a handcrafted wooden chest that my father had built for my mother, I snapped. I ran forward, screaming at the workers to stop. I pulled out my phone and called Julian, my hands shaking violently from the cold and the rage. He answered on the third ring, the sound of keyboard clicks and office chatter audible in the background. "Julian, you have to stop them," I choked out, tears mixing with the rain on my face. "They're throwing away everything. They're tossing his custom tools into the scrap pile. Please, can you at least come down for one weekend? Just one weekend to help me sort through his personal papers and save the important things? I haven't slept more than 4 consecutive hours in 8 months. I can't do this alone." There was a long, heavy, agonizing pause on the line. I could hear him breathing. And then Julian let out a soft, irritated, incredibly condescending sigh. "Chloe, you're being highly emotional and completely irrational," he said, his voice cold and clinical. "The equipment is depreciated asset capital. It's junk. The cost of individual valuation, packaging, and transport completely outweighs the secondary market return. We need to clear the corporate ledger immediately to prevent personal liability tracking to the primary estate. You need to focus on Dad's physical maintenance and leave the complex financial architecture to me." "He built these tools by hand, Julian," I screamed, not caring that the scrap workers were staring at me. He used these tools to build the very house you grew up in. Have you completely lost your humanity? We've discussed this, Chloe, Julian snapped back, his tone hardening into pure ice. Your choice to absorb the primary care role was your own. You didn't consult us before taking him off the agency registry. If you are feeling overwhelmed, that is an operational failure on your end due to a lack of structural scheduling. I am managing the high-level survival of our family's long-term capital assets. Do not call me during market hours unless his vitals are actively failing. Click. He hung up. That was the last time he spoke to me directly in the year 2020. My sister Beatrice was a different kind of nightmare. She only called when she wanted to maintain her public image as the devoted daughter. Once a year, usually around Thanksgiving or Christmas, she would fly into the local regional airport, take a luxury black car rideshare to the house, and spend exactly 45 minutes in the living room. She would sweep through the front door wearing thousands of dollars in designer clothing, bringing a high-end silk scarf or an expensive imported cashmere throw blanket that my father couldn't use, couldn't appreciate, and would likely spill nutritional formula on within an hour. She would drape it over his wheelchair, pull out her phone, and spend 20 solid minutes taking high-definition, carefully angled photos of herself holding his trembling hand. She would post them instantly with captions like, "Cherishing these precious, fragile moments with my anchor. Family is everything. Grateful for the strength to support him through this incredibly difficult journey. Hashtag daddy's girl. Hashtag caregiver strong." The absolute second the camera app was closed, her entire demeanor changed. The fake, sorrowful smile would vanish. She would pull out her boutique hand sanitizer, spray her perfectly manicured hands aggressively, and look around the historic living room with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Chloe, this place smells like an absolute nursing home," she complained during her 2021 visit, aggressively adjusting her sunglasses on top of her head. "Can't you use those expensive French room sprays I sent you? And honestly, look at his clothes. He's wearing stained gray sweatpants. It's so depressing. What if one of my friends saw him looking like this?" I looked at her, my eyes burning from exhaustion. "Beatrice, he has an advanced neurological disorder. He wipes his face on his sleeves because he can't control his motor functions. If you want him in better clothes, you are more than welcome to stay here for a week, do his laundry, and wrestle him into a button-down shirt. He needs to be changed 3 times a day." Beatrice scoffed, waving her hand dismissively as she checked the notifications on her gold Apple Watch. "Oh, please, don't start with the martyr act again, Chloe. It's exhausting. We all make sacrifices. Do you know how hard it was for me to clear my schedule just to fly up here to this depressing town and see him? The flight was delayed 2 hours, and the energy in this house is completely toxic for my alignment. I have a major charity gala for ocean conservation in Palm Beach on Saturday, so I need to leave for the boutique hotel in the city by 5. She never checked his medical charts. She never helped me lift him into his specialized bath. She never spent a single solitary dollar of her wealthy husband's money on his expensive adult diapers, his dietary thickeners, or his specialized orthopedic bedding. She would simply leave after her photo session, her luxury car kicking up gravel on the driveway, leaving me entirely alone in the silent, heavy house with a dying man. And in his rare, fleeting moments of sudden, absolute clarity, my father would look at me. The fog in his eyes would clear for just a few minutes, and the proud, strong man I used to know would return. He would see me looking exhausted, with dark circles under my eyes, wearing the same sweatpants for 3 days, and tears would roll down his weathered cheeks. He would grip my hand with surprising strength and whisper, "I'm so sorry, Chloe. I'm so incredibly sorry I'm a burden to you. You should be living your life." "You're not a burden, Dad," I would tell him, resting my forehead against his frail shoulder, crying silently where he couldn't see my face. "You're my dad. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." And I didn't. I stayed, through every single nightmare. I stayed through the terrifying hospital runs in the middle of winter when his lungs filled with fluid and he couldn't breathe. I stayed through the agonizing phase where he completely forgot my name and called me the nice lady who brings the soup. I stayed through the physical degradation that stripped a proud 6'2" artisan down to a fragile 90-pound shadow of a human being. I gave up my 20s. Every single friend I had slowly stopped calling because I could never go out. I lost my partner, an amazing guy who tried his best but eventually walked away because he couldn't handle a relationship where every single date night was interrupted by a medical emergency or a sudden, crushing panic attack about my father's oxygen levels. I became completely isolated. I was broke. I was entirely dependent on the small, strictly monitored monthly stipend my father had set up from his remaining personal retirement annuity. A stipend that Julian constantly audited and threatened to cut off if I didn't submit itemized, categorized receipts for every single loaf of bread, gallon of milk, or tube of toothpaste I bought. By the summer of 2025, my father's decline entered its final, irreversible terminal phase. The hospice nurse we were assigned, a wonderful, compassionate woman named Maria, who essentially became my only real link to the outside world, sat me down at the kitchen table one Tuesday morning. She held my hands, looked me in the eye, and told me gently that we were looking at months, if not weeks. His internal organs were slowly shutting down. He was spending 23 hours a day in a deep, unresponsive, heavy sleep. I immediately sent a formal, urgent notification to Julian and Beatrice. I bypassed the group chat and sent it directly via email and text, marking it as highly important. I told them clearly, Dad is entering active decline. The hospice nurse says it is the end. If you want to say goodbye while he can still hear your voice, you need to get on a plane and come right now. Beatrice replied 20 minutes later with an automated out-of-office message. She was on a silent wellness and detox retreat in Sedona, Arizona, and claimed she couldn't be reached by cellular data for 10 days. Julian sent a one-line reply from his phone. Acknowledge receipt. Keep me updated on the clinical timeline. Coordinate with Maria regarding the prompt issuance of the official death certificate when the time comes, as I will need it to immediately notify our estate registry and unfreeze the capital assets. Not a single one of them came. They didn't want to see the ugly reality of death. They didn't want to smell the heavy, thick air of a terminal sick room. They didn't want to hold his hand while he took his agonizing, rattling breaths. They wanted to wait until the unpleasant, messy, human part of existence was finished, so they could arrive fresh-faced for the clean, profitable extraction of the remaining equity. On October 14th at 4:12 a.m., the constant, rhythmic clicking of the oxygen concentrator in my father's room suddenly felt incredibly loud. I was sitting in the worn armchair beside his bed, wrapped in a faded quilt, fighting to keep my eyes open. I watched his chest rise and fall. The intervals between his breaths became longer, 10 seconds, then 20 seconds. They were heavy, strained. I stood up, my heart pounding in my throat, and took his hand. His fingers were cold, but his skin was still soft. Suddenly, his eyes opened, and I mean really opened. For the first time in nearly 2 years, the cloudy, distant, vacant look in his gaze was entirely gone. He looked directly at me. His eyes were sharp, clear, and filled with an overwhelming, painful depth of recognition. It was as if the disease had momentarily vanished, giving him a few seconds of pure clarity before the end. He squeezed my hand with a surprising, sudden strength. "My beautiful, faithful girl," he whispered. His voice was incredibly faint, dry as dust, but completely steady. "You stayed." "I'm here, Dad," I choked out, the tears blinding me instantly, falling onto his blanket. "I'm right here. I'm not leaving." "I know," he said, an incredibly small, gentle smile touching the corner of his pale lips. "I know everything. Thank you, Chloe. It's done now. You can let me go." He let out a long, slow, rattling sigh. His grip relaxed, his eyes closed, and his chest stopped moving. The house became completely, terrifyingly still. The only sound was the useless hum of the oxygen machine. I sat there in the dark for 3 hours. I just held his cold hand against my cheek, listening to the silence, feeling an overwhelming tidal wave of devastating grief, mixed with a strange, quiet, heavy peace. He was finally free. His broken body couldn't trap him anymore. I called Maria at 7 a.m. By noon, the funeral home transport van had arrived, quietly taken his body away, and left. The house felt incredibly wide, empty, and colder than it ever had before. I sat on the living room sofa and sent a short, simple message to the family group chat. "Dad passed away peacefully at 4:12 this morning. The arrangements are pending. I will let you know when the service is." I expected a phone call. I expected Julian or Beatrice to call me crying. I expected a shared moment of family grief, or at least a brief expression of sympathy for the fact that I had just watched our father die alone in the dark. Instead, exactly 40 minutes later, my phone pinged with a notification from an unknown email address. It was an email from a high-end corporate law firm based in Manhattan, Sterling and Vance LLC, representing Julian and Beatrice Vance. The email contained an attached digital copy of a formal hostile legal notice. It stated that as the primary co-executors of the Arthur Vance estate, based on a will from 2012, Julian and Beatrice were initiating an immediate, comprehensive inventory assessment of the residential property. It advised me that all personal assets, furnishings, antiques, bank accounts, and real estate structures were considered legally frozen estate property. And finally, it stated that my occupancy status in the home would be formally reviewed within 48 hours, and I was forbidden from removing any items from the premises. They didn't even wait for his body to be placed in the ground. Their grief was a legal document. Their mourning process was an asset freeze. I sat at the kitchen table, looking at the glowing screen of my phone, and I felt a cold, hard knot form deep in the pit of my stomach. The deep, paralyzing sadness that had consumed me for years suddenly shifted. It hardened into something sharp, cold, and incredibly focused. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't reply to the email. Instead, I stood up, walked down the long, dark hallway to my father's old study, and opened the heavy bottom drawer of his solid oak desk. Hidden beneath a stack of old corporate tax ledgers from the 1992nd was a thick, professional-grade manila folder, secured with a heavy black rubber band. I carried the folder back to the kitchen, laid it under the soft light of the table, and began to read. And honestly, if you've ever wondered if a silent, compliant person can build a wall high enough to stop a bulldozer, this is the part where the entire game changes. If you are listening to this late at night, letting the stories play out, pay very close attention to this next part, because this is exactly how you handle people who think their corporate titles, their money, and their arrogance make them untouchable. You see, Julian and Beatrice had been operating under a massive, fatal assumption for 8 long years. Because my father's voice had become slurred, because he drooled, and because his hands could no longer grip a pen, they assumed his mind was completely, entirely gone. Because they spent less than an hour a year in his presence, they treated him like an inanimate object, an intellectual void that couldn't comprehend the world around him. But dementia isn't a straight line. It's a series of steep drop-offs and long plateaus, punctuated by moments of absolute, razor-sharp cognitive clarity. And during one of those extended, incredibly lucid plateaus in the spring of 2022, my father had looked at his family. He evaluated the absolute, glaring absence of his older children. He saw the way Julian treated me like an employee. He saw Beatrice posing for photos and fleeing. And he made a highly calculated, permanent decision. He had asked me to call his lifelong friend and personal estate attorney, a sharp, unyielding older man named Thomas, no relation to us, just a common name in our region. He requested an emergency, confidential residential visit while Julian and Beatrice were completely unreachable in their respective luxury lives. For 3 weeks, while I was out running medical errands or catching exhausted naps in the afternoon, Thomas had secretly visited the house. He didn't come alone. He brought a certified court stenographer. He brought a video recording specialist. And crucially, he brought an independent, court-approved forensic psychiatrist who spent hours evaluating my father's cognitive capacity, asking him complex questions about his assets, the date, the year, and his family dynamics. They thoroughly documented his absolute clarity. They recorded his explicit, unarguable testimony. And then, acting entirely on my father's instructions, they executed a total, ironclad restructuring of his entire earthly existence. The folder on my kitchen table contained 3 primary documents. The first was a certified recorded quitclaim deed for the 4-acre historic property and the residential structure, executed flawlessly in May 2022. The deed formally transferred 100% ownership of the entire property directly to me, Chloe Vance, as a living gift in consideration of extraordinary and sustained long-term care services rendered. This wasn't a will, this was a direct transfer. The deed had been quietly and legally recorded with the county clerk's office 3 years ago. The house wasn't part of the estate. It didn't belong to Arthur Vance when he died. It belonged to me. It had belonged to me for 36 months. The second document was an unalterable, irrevocable living trust. My father had taken his remaining personal life insurance policy, his private investment portfolio, and the residual capital from his firm's liquidation, the exact assets that Julian assumed were sitting in a frozen corporate account waiting for him, and placed them securely inside this trust. The sole trustee and primary beneficiary was listed as Chloe Vance. But my father didn't stop there. The trust agreement contained a specific, brutal disinheritance clause. It explicitly noted that Julian and Beatrice Vance were intentionally, permanently excluded from any distribution, citing a documented, verified history of complete emotional and physical abandonment during a terminal medical crisis. The third item in the folder was a small silver USB flash drive containing a high-definition video file. I plugged it into my laptop. The screen lit up, showing my father sitting in his favorite armchair by the window. He looked thin and his hands trembled, but his eyes were bright, fierce, and completely focused. He looked directly into the camera lens and spoke with absolute, chilling authority. "My name is Arthur Vance." His voice resonated through the quiet kitchen, clear and strong. "I am making this statement of my own free will, with full cognitive clarity, as verified by the medical professionals present in this room. This recording is intended to accompany my final estate declarations, to prevent any legal contestation. To my son Julian and my daughter Beatrice, you have chosen to treat my illness as a financial inconvenience. You have discarded your fundamental responsibilities as children, and you have deliberately left your younger sister to carry the entire crushing weight of my final years alone, while you enjoyed the fruits of the capital I provided for you. You assumed I could not see your greed. You assumed my silence was ignorance. You were wrong. I see it clearly. I have legally stripped you of every single dime of my inheritance. Do not look to Chloe for compensation. She earned this home with her sweat, her tears, and her unconditional love. You earned nothing but this tape. Do not harass her. Goodbye." I closed the laptop. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a profound, overwhelming wave of gratitude wash over me. My father hadn't just survived those horrific years. He had actively, brilliantly protected me from the shadow of the monsters who were supposed to be my siblings. I put the papers back in the folder, walked upstairs to my room, and for the first time in nearly 3,000 days, I slept for 8 straight hours without waking up once. The next morning, the storm broke. At exactly 8:15 a.m., the loud, deep, aggressive rumble of a commercial diesel engine shattered the quiet of the rural road outside my window. I walked to the front living room window and pulled back the lace curtains. A massive, bright orange, 26-foot commercial moving truck was backing aggressively down my gravel driveway, its reverse beeper echoing loudly off the surrounding trees. Behind it was a luxury black European SUV and a sleek, tinted corporate sedan. The convoy parked directly across my front lawn, the heavy truck tires leaving deep, muddy ruts in the soft autumn grass. The doors opened and out stepped Julian. He was wearing a tailored charcoal overcoat, an expensive silk scarf, and leather gloves, looking like he had just stepped out of a corporate boardroom ready to execute a hostile takeover. From the passenger side of the SUV, Beatrice emerged. She was wearing massive designer sunglasses, an oversized, expensive winter coat, and a scowl that could freeze boiling water. Following them from the sedan was a sharp-looking man in his late 30s carrying a thick leather briefcase, their high-priced Manhattan probate attorney. And behind him were 3 burly, heavily tattooed men wearing moving company uniforms, carrying hand trucks, packing tape, and stacks of empty cardboard boxes. They didn't ring the doorbell. They didn't knock. Julian simply turned the brass doorknob, which I had intentionally left unlocked for this exact moment, and pushed the heavy oak front door open. He stepped into the foyer with absolute, sickening authority, acting as if he already owned the air inside the house. "Chloe!" Julian's voice boomed through the hallway, echoing off the high ceilings. "Get down here immediately. We're on an incredibly tight operational timeline today. The estate assessors are scheduled for Friday, and we need to clear out the high-value physical assets before the formal valuation team arrives. I walk slowly down the stairs, keeping my hands slipped calmly into the pockets of my long cardigan. I stopped on the third step from the bottom, looking down at the small crowd standing in my foyer. The movers were already walking past Julian toward the dining room, looking greedily at the antique, hand-carved mahogany sideboard that had belonged to my great-grandmother. "Stop right there," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was low, flat, and completely devoid of emotion. The movers hesitated, stopping in the doorway. Beatrice stepped forward, pulling her sunglasses down to the bridge of her nose, looking up at me with a mixture of intense irritation and superficial pity. "Oh, please, cut the dramatic act, Chloe," she sighed, waving her manicured hand dismissively toward the dining room. "We don't have time for your emotional outbursts today. Julian and I have actual businesses to run. We need to clear out Mom's antique china, the silver sets, the living room tapestries, and Dad's historical furniture. We've already listed the house with a premium luxury broker in New York, and they want the structure completely empty for professional staging by next Monday. You need to pack your personal clothes and clear out your bedroom by tonight. We'll give you $500 for a hotel." "This house is not on the market, Beatrice," I said, my voice completely steady, "and you are not touching a single piece of furniture in this room." Julian stepped forward, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive coat, his expression hardening into that cold, corporate sneer I had hated my entire life. He gestured to the man with the briefcase beside him. "Chloe, let's be entirely professional here, all right?" Julian said, his voice dropping into a patronizing, slow cadence, as if he were speaking to a slow child. "This is Mr. Vance's legal counsel, Mr. Sterling. As the primary co-executors explicitly named in Dad's original 2012 family estate framework, Beatrice and I hold full administrative authority over all physical and structural assets of the Arthur Vance estate. Your status here has been downgraded to a non-paying occupant at sufferance. We have already filed the initial probate registry in Manhattan. You have zero legal standing to impede this liquidation process. If you cause a scene, Mr. Sterling is prepared to file an immediate emergency injunction for asset conversion, and we will have you forcibly removed by the local police. Do you understand the massive legal exposure you're creating for yourself right now?" Mr. Sterling, the attorney, stepped forward, opening his briefcase with a sharp metallic click and pulling out a thick stack of papers. "Miss Vance, my clients are acting strictly within their explicit statutory rights as designated estate administrators. Here is the formal notice of asset inventory. I highly suggest you cooperate to avoid massive personal civil liability and potential legal fees." I looked at the papers in his hand. Then I looked past him, directly into Julian's cold, arrogant eyes. I felt a small, genuinely calm smile touch my face, the exact kind of smile that makes a narcissist deeply uncomfortable because it doesn't fit the script they wrote in their head. "Before we discuss your inventory lists, Julian," I said, stepping off the stairs and standing directly in front of him, "I want to ask you both a very simple question. And I want you to answer it honestly, right now, in front of your lawyer." Beatrice rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "Oh my God, what now? We don't have time for a group therapy session, Chloe." "When was the last time either of you sat in this house for more than an hour?" I asked, my gaze shifting between the two of them. "When was the last time you changed his sheets? When was the last time you held a cup to his lips so he could take a drink of water without choking? Do you even know what his final words were before his heart stopped yesterday morning?" Julian's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He took a sharp step forward, his voice losing its controlled, corporate polish and rising into an aggressive, threatening snap. "That is completely irrelevant to the capital allocation framework," Julian barked, pointing a gloved finger at my face. "Your emotional contribution does not translate to equity ownership under New York probate statutes. We provided the foundational corporate structure that funded this family for decades. You chose to sit here in the dark and play the martyr instead of building a career, and now the bill is due. You do not get to hold our family's real estate assets hostage because you have a complex about your lifestyle choices. Now, tell your movers to start packing the dining room, or so help me God, Chloe, I will make sure you leave this property with nothing but the clothes on your back. I nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. Okay, you want to discuss the legal framework, Julian? Let's discuss the legal framework. I pulled the thick manila folder out from behind my back and handed it directly to Mr. Sterling, the probate attorney. I strongly suggest you review Section 2, and specifically the recorded land registry filings on page 4, before you allow your clients to move another foot into my house, I said quietly. Mr. Sterling looked at me with a slight frown, adjusting his expensive glasses. He took the folder, opened it, and began to skim the first page. Within 5 seconds, his casual, arrogant posture completely vanished. His hand stopped mid-turn. His eyes widened significantly behind his lenses, and he quickly flipped to the 4th page, staring directly at the blue-inked certification stamp of the county clerk's office. "What is that?" Julian snapped, noticing his lawyer's sudden drastic change in expression. "Sterling, what is that? It's just some old medical receipts or some nonsense she's trying to stall with. Ignore her and tell her we're moving the furniture." Mr. Sterling didn't answer him. He quickly turned to the trust documentation, his face growing visibly paler with every single line he read. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his smartphone with trembling fingers, quickly tapped into the New York State Unified Land Registry portal, and typed in the property's parcel identification number. "Sterling!" Beatrice shouted, her voice shrill and intensely irritated. "What is wrong with you? Why are you just standing there staring at your phone? Tell the movers to take the antique sideboard." Mr. Sterling slowly lowered his phone. He closed his eyes for a brief second, then turned to Julian and Beatrice. His voice dropped into a low, dead, horrified whisper. "Julian, Beatrice, we need to leave, right now." Julian blinked, completely blindsided by the shift in tone. "What are you talking about? We have the 2012 will executorship. She's stalling." "The 2012 will is completely irrelevant," Mr. Sterling said, his hands visibly shaking as he shoved the papers back into the folder and thrust it back toward me. "Your father executed a certified quitclaim deed in May of 2022. He transferred the entire real property, this house, the land, the outbuildings, everything, directly to Chloe Vance as a living gift. The deed was legally and irrevocably recorded with the county 3 years ago. This house does not belong to the Arthur Vance estate. It hasn't belonged to him for 3 years. It is 100% the private property of your sister Chloe." The silence that fell over the foyer was absolute, deafening. You could hear the old grandfather clock ticking loudly in the corner of the living room. Beatrice stared at her high-priced lawyer, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "What?" she finally shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. "That's impossible. That's illegal. Dad was a complete vegetable in 2022. He couldn't sign a check, let alone a multi-million-dollar house deed. She forced him. She manipulated him. It's elder abuse. It's fraud. Cancel it, Sterling. Cancel the deed." "It's not fraud, Beatrice," Mr. Sterling said, his voice filled with intense professional panic, realizing the liability he had just walked into. "There is a full, notarized competency certification attached here, signed by Dr. Robert Chen, the chief of neurogeriatrics at the State University Hospital, along with an independent judicial witness report. He had full, unarguable legal capacity at the time of execution. And that's not all." Julian stepped closer, his face completely pale, his chest heaving under his coat. "What else, Sterling? Speak." "The liquid accounts, the corporate residual funds from the business liquidation, the life insurance." Mr. Sterling swallowed hard, looking at Julian with pure dread. "They aren't in the estate bank accounts. Your father established an irrevocable living trust in the same month. All capital assets were transferred into it. Chloe is the sole trustee and primary beneficiary. You and Beatrice are explicitly, legally disinherited by name in the text of the trust framework. There is also a formal video affidavit attached to prevent contestation. Julian, there is no probate estate. The total value of the assets accessible under your 2012 executorship is exactly $0. There is literally nothing to administer. There is nothing to sell. If you have ever watched an intensely arrogant, narcissistic person realize their entire reality is an illusion, you know the look that came over Julian's face in that moment. It was a terrifying, visceral mixture of shock, absolute public humiliation, and a sudden, primal, unhinged rage. He spun around, looking at me, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "You bitch!" he roared, lunging toward the stairs where I stood. "You stole our inheritance! You sat here in the dark for years and brainwashed a sick, dying old man into stripping his own children of their birthright. I built the credit lines that kept his company alive in the early 2000 seconds. I am a Vance. You are nothing but a dropout maid who used a sick man to steal a multi-million-dollar estate." He reached for my arm, his gloved hand extending to grab the collar of my cardigan to physically pull me down the steps. But he never touched me. The moment his foot hit the bottom step, two large figures moved incredibly fast through the front door, which had been left wide open. It was Deputy Sheriff Miller and Deputy Collins, whom I had called at 7:30 a.m. to request a civil standby property protection detail, knowing exactly what kind of unhinged scene my siblings would create. Deputy Miller, a man built like a brick wall with a thick, no-nonsense mustache, clamped his heavy hand directly onto Julian's shoulder, twisting him violently away from the stairs and slamming him firmly against the plaster wall of the foyer. "Step back, sir," Miller barked, his voice booming with absolute legal authority, his hand hovering near his belt. "Keep your hands off her right now. Turn around and face the wall." "Do you know who I am?" Julian screamed, his cheek pressed awkwardly against the cold plaster, his tailored coat twisting under the deputy's grip. "I am a senior VP at a major investment firm. I am the executor of this estate. These people are trespassing on my family property." "Actually, sir, you're the one trespassing," Deputy Collins said smoothly, stepping between Beatrice and the stunned movers. "We've already verified the land registry with Miss Chloe Vance this morning before we arrived. She is the sole, lawful deeded owner of this property. You, your sister, your attorney, and these commercial moving trucks are currently on her private land without her permission. Miss Vance, do you want these individuals formally removed from your property?" I looked down at Julian, who was panting against the wall, his expensive silk scarf ruined, his corporate dignity completely and utterly shattered. Then I looked at Beatrice, who was trembling uncontrollably, tears of pure, impotent fury rolling down her face, her designer sunglasses lying cracked on the hardwood floor where they had fallen during the scuffle. "Yes, Deputy," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the silent house. "I want them off my land immediately, and if they or their trucks are still on my driveway in exactly 5 minutes, I want them arrested for criminal trespass." Deputy Miller released Julian, giving him a firm, authoritative push toward the open front door. "You heard the lady, folks. The party's over. Let's move it out. Movers, take your trucks and get down the road right now before I start issuing commercial vehicle citations for property damage." The movers didn't need to be told twice. They dropped their hand trucks, ran down the porch steps, and scrambled into the cab of the orange moving truck. Within 30 seconds, the massive diesel engine roared to life, and the truck began speeding backward up the driveway, throwing mud and gravel into the air as it fled the property in a panic. Mr. Sterling was already walking out, his briefcase clutched tightly to his chest, not looking back once. "Julian, Beatrice, I am formally withdrawing as your counsel for this matter. Do not call my office again. You have zero legal standing, and I am not exposing my firm to a malicious prosecution or harassment suit over a case with a certified video affidavit." He practically ran down the driveway to his sedan, threw it in gear, and sped away. Beatrice stood on the front porch, her hands clutched into tight fists, screaming at me through the open door while Deputy Collins escorted her slowly toward her SUV. "You think you've won, Chloe?" she shrieked, her voice cracking into a high, hysterical, terrifying wail. "You're disgusting. You're dead to us. Do you hear me? You have no family anymore. When you're sitting in this old, rotting house all by yourself, rotting just like Dad did, remember that you threw your own brother and sister away for a piece of dirt. We hate you." Julian stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He turned back to look at me, his face twisted into a mask of pure, cold, calculated hatred. He didn't scream like Beatrice. He just pointed a trembling finger at me, his voice shaking with an intense, quiet rage. I will spend every single dollar I have to break that trust, Chloe, he whispered, his eyes dark and menacing. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 10 years until you are bankrupt and living on the street. You haven't seen the end of this. I have the video, Julian, I said calmly, leaning against the doorframe, looking down at him with an expression of pure, unbothered, absolute peace. I have 40 minutes of high-definition video of Dad explaining exactly what you are. If you file a single legal motion against me, I won't just fight it in court. I will send that video, along with every single cold text message you sent me, refusing to visit him while he was dying, directly to the board of directors at your investment firm. Let's see how your high-net-worth clients feel about trusting their capital to a man who is publicly documented as a financial predator who abandoned his dying father. Try me. I dare you. Julian froze. The final, desperate threat died instantly in his throat. He looked at me, realizing for the first time in his life that the quiet, compliant, invisible little sister he had spent decades stepping on was completely gone. In her place was a woman who had been forged in the absolute fire of an 8-year trial. A woman who possessed the absolute iron will of the man who had built this house. He didn't say another word. He turned around, climbed into the driver's seat of his luxury SUV, slammed the door, and accelerated violently down the driveway, his tires spinning in the mud, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of exhaust and a profound, beautiful, heavy silence. The deputies stayed until the sound of their engine completely faded into the distance. Deputy Miller walked back up the porch steps, pulling a small card from his pocket and handing it to me with a respectful nod. "You okay, Miss Vance?" he asked gently. "That was a pretty nasty piece of business." "I'm better than okay, Deputy," I said, taking the card. "For the first time in 8 years, I can finally breathe." "Well, you call us if they so much as slow down their car near your mailbox," he said. "We don't take kindly to people coming down here trying to bully local folks out of their homes. Take care of yourself." They walked down to their patrol car, pulled out of the driveway, and drove away, leaving me completely alone on the property. I walked back inside the house and closed the heavy oak door, turning the deadbolt with a loud, incredibly satisfying click. I walked through the dining room, past the beautiful mahogany sideboard that my family had been so desperate to steal, and stepped into my father's empty bedroom. The medical bed was gone, returned to the hospice agency. The air no longer smelled like chemicals or sickness. The window was cracked open, allowing the crisp, clean autumn air to fill the room. The sun was streaming through the glass, casting long, golden shapes across the clean, hardwood floor. I sat down on the low windowsill, pulling my knees up to my chest, wrapping my arms around myself. For the longest time, I thought that my life would feel empty when my father passed away. I thought the silence would be unbearable, that the weight of the years I had sacrificed would crush me. But as I sat there in the golden afternoon light, looking out over the 4 acres of land that belonged entirely to me, I didn't feel empty at all. I felt an overwhelming, deep, and unshakable sense of victory. I had kept my promise. I had protected my father's dignity until his very last breath. And in return, he had given me the ultimate protection, ensuring that the people who spent their lives extracting value from others could never extract a single piece of my future. It's been a few months since that morning. Julian never filed a lawsuit. Beatrice's social media feeds went completely dark for 2 months, and when she returned, she had deleted every single photo she had ever posted of our father. They are completely blocked on every avenue of communication. To me, they don't exist anymore. Next week, I am opening the front gates of this property to a local architectural restoration nonprofit, using a portion of the funds from my father's trust to establish a permanent youth woodshop in his old building. The storm came, but the house stood. Thank you all for listening to my story tonight. If you're sitting awake late, dealing with your own family storms, just remember that boundaries aren't selfish. Sometimes, protecting yourself is the only way to honor the people who truly loved you. Let me know in the comments what you think, and please, take care of yourselves out there. Good night.